Well, good early morning, Lions 2 class. It's good to see you somewhat. I hope you're seeing me anyway. Make sure you watch these videos, they're awesome. Cheap plug. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we're going to take a look at a man named Alexander MacKay. Father, in this early morning, I pray that you would open my eyes and my mind to be able to clearly express the life and ministry and impact of Alexander MacKay, and especially his love for science and how science impacted his missions work. I pray that this would be a blessing to my students. I pray that you'd bring an end to the coronavirus and that you would glorify yourself in doing so, as much as you glorified yourself in sending it. May your blessing be upon the students and their families and upon BCS. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, you should be able to do these notes if you have downloaded them from the GC. And let's go ahead and get started. Alexander MacKay, he lived from 1849 to 1890. He was born in Rhynie, Scotland, and his father was pastor of a free church, which was non-state sanctioned. So that's what it means by free. It wasn't like paid for or sponsored by the state. And he took it upon himself to learn, to ensure that Alexander learned as much as he could. So Dad was really into education. By the age of 3, he could read the New Testament fluently. 3. By the age of 7, he was reading high school appropriate textbooks. So imagine your science and your books that you read for your English classes and so forth. He was reading them at 7 and understood them. He and his father used to take long walks together, and they would look at nature around them. He would ask and answer various questions of his father. And his father often spoke of the missions work that needed to be done along the Zambezi River. It's the same Zambezi River where David Livingstone did his ministry. There were letters from distinguished scholars like Hugh Miller and Sir Roderick Murchison. And by the way, Murchison, we're not going to really talk much about him, but if you're ever in Africa, if you're over along the Zambezi River and you come along the Murchison Falls, named for a missionary. I know, crazy, right? So that's Sir Roderick Murchison. They read books by them and talked together about what these men had seen and done. By the age of 10, Alexander was skilled in geography and map making. He would make his own maps, and he could name all these different countries and place all these different cities and so forth in his world maps. Every bit of practical knowledge about a wide variety of subjects was learned and retained for future use. You'll see how all that trivia doesn't help you just on Jeopardy. It can help you in missions work, wherever you end up. In 1865, Alexander mourned his mother's death. His last words to him were, "Search the scriptures." Man, I think about that all the time. Like, if this was my last day, if this was the last thing that I was going to say for future posterity and stuff, what would I say? And I've joked with you before that knowing my luck, I'll probably forget. I'll come up with something really awesome and I'll forget. And there I am on my deathbed saying, I forgot what I was going to say. And that's going to be my last words. So maybe I have to get it and write it on my hand or something like that. I don't know. So far, I'm still working on it, so don't worry about it. Not that you were. In 1867, he started studies in the Free Church Ministry Training School in order to become a missionary. In 1869, he entered the Edinburgh University to study classical literature, applied mechanics, higher mathematics, philosophy, and engineering. And, just to make sure he's well-rounded, at night he would attend lectures on chemistry and geology. That was just for fun. Those weren't actually classes that he was taking. He just wanted to learn more. So if you're into education, Alexander MacKay, he got you, bro. On Sundays, he was a regular participant in the worship services. 1873, he studied languages and linguistics in Germany. Of course he did. Why not? And we find that he would fill his evenings translating a German textbook on differential and integral calculus. That was his hobby. He added inventing to his accomplishments by creating an agricultural machine. It won first prize at the steam engines competition in Breslau, and he also was made chief engineer of a railroad's locomotive unit. Why not? And in 1874, Alexander made the decision to do missionary work. Now, you would think after all that education that he could do things like, teach in a university, teach at a high school, something like that. No, instead he decides that he wants to be a missionary. And so the idea started in him by an appeal from a man named Burns Thompson for missionaries to go to Madagascar. Some of you have seen the movie. When I think about the fact that he was unable to enter the mission field as a minister, you thought maybe he would go and say, well, missionary stuff didn't pan out, so I'm going to go back and do something else. He did do something else, but he couldn't get to the mission field as a minister at this time, so he went into the field that he knew best, which was engineering. Remember, he just won a prize for best steam engine in a competition. But the London Missionary Society told him, Madagascar doesn't need you yet. I find it interesting that when a man wants to go into the mission field, and a man who has such great education and zeal, of course, for the Lord, that the Missionary Society would say, yeah, Madagascar doesn't need people like you. So we'll find out where he ends up. In 1875, the Daily Telegraph published Henry Stanley's call for Christian missionaries to go to Uganda. You remember Henry Stanley from looking for Dr. Livingston. Dr. Livingston, I presume. And so Henry Stanley, writing in the Daily Telegraph, said, we need some missionaries to go to Uganda. And so the Church Missionary Society, not the London Missionary Society, this is a different one now, the Church Missionary Society gladly accepted MacKay's offer of service in the mission field. They're like, yeah, man, you want to go to the mission field? We want you to go. There's lost people. They need to hear the gospel, and you want to go and be a missionary. That's awesome. So Alexander decided that he would put his engineering to use on the mission field. He designed a lightweight engine and a boat that could be carried by just 2 men. It would fold up. Like, we look at that kind of stuff and say, yeah, absolutely, sure it does. You know, maybe a Brookstone store or something would have that. We have fold-up bicycles, why not? So he had come up with a portable engine and a fold-up boat that just 2 men would be required to carry it. That would be super handy in the mission field, especially when there might not be roads and that rivers are the only thing that you can transport yourself on. So a year later, in 1876, in April, Alexander and several other men departed England for Zanzibar, which is now part of Tanzania. It actually was 2 nations shoved together, Tanganyika on the shore and Zanzibar, which is an island, and they were now pushed together and called Tanzania. So if you see Tanzania on the map, it used to be 2 nations, and now it's just 1. Alexander said, I want to remind the committee that within 6 months they will probably hear that one of us is dead. Yes, is it at all likely that 8 Englishmen should start for Central Africa and all be alive 6 months later? One of us, at least, and it may be I, will surely fall before that. When the news comes, do not be cast down, but send someone else immediately to take the vacant place. Hey, if I kick the bucket, immediately get a replacement. Missions. Taking the gospel where it's not been heard is that important. By the end of year 2, only Alexander remained alive. So he was correct. Africa was very rough on Europeans. They didn't have any kind of immunity built up for it, and so when they got into the presence of typical or normal African weather and African food and African diseases, they had no immunity to it, and it slayed them, something fierce. Finding the Wami and the Kingami rivers impassable, they proceeded on foot to the base site. That was hard going too. In November, Alexander became seriously ill, and the Church Missionary Society made him wait to leave for Tanzania, for Uganda, until he recovered from that. And so he did. And in June of the next year, he went the 230-mile road path that he carved out by himself. He carved out that road on the way to Mumbapa. And 230 miles of a road that he hacked out of the jungle with his machete. That's probably going to take a while. In March of 1878, Alexander found the murdered bodies of 2 members of his party at the base site, and so he's down to himself. He cautiously went to visit King Lonkonge, who had executed his friends, to ask him for permission to be there. Apparently, having missionaries just show up, that's not a cool thing with King Lonkonge. Finding supplies that he had sent with his friends, he built his portable boat in just 10 days, working from dawn to dusk. He got his boat together by himself in just 10 days. He had a bout of dysentery. Don't we all? I'm just kidding. I don't have dysentery. After a bout of dysentery, he was joined by C.T. Wilson, and they sailed for Uganda. After 4 days, they wrecked. They wrecked the boat on the river, and they needed 8 weeks to build another boat out of the salvaged pieces. But hey, that's where your engineering degree comes in. You take a broken, smashed up boat, and say to yourself, what can I get out of this? What can I fix this boat with? If I can't fix it, what can I do to make another boat from the parts that are not broken? And so he did. In 10 days, he built a brand new one. After 4 days, they wrecked, and they needed 8 weeks to build another boat. They finally reached Rubaga, which was the capital of Uganda at that time, on November 6th, 1878. King Mutesa, who had told Henry Stanley to send white men, greeted Alexander quite warmly. Mutesa was a man who was very interested in a variety of subjects such as railways, electricity, astronomy, and physiology. So don't think that just because a person lives in a rural area, a poor area, an unreached people group area, that they don't have interest in these things. We need to have missionaries that are well-rounded, that can speak on different subjects. Sometimes I find that my past interests in different things have been quite useful with opening up doors of conversation to the gospel. So be well-rounded. Read from a lot of different sources. Have different interests and hobbies, and the Lord will lead you to people for whom those hobbies will be an open door. Alexander's mechanical skills won him a great audience for the gospel, and Mutesa wanted to learn more about the Christian faith to which Stanley had introduced him. But Mutesa was also a very wicked man, and daily he would execute several of his own people for petty offenses. He was also known in that area for having the largest harem ever known to any man, that he had more women at his beck and call than anyone that they could think of. Nearby Muslims, jealous of Alexander, believed that his faith would end their lucrative slave trade. They gave Mutesa a Quran, and they worked to turn him to Islam, bribing him with presents like firearms. We know that MacKay had not offered him things like this yet. Roman Catholic missionaries came, and they claimed to be the one true religion, and they began persecuting Alexander and his associates. Mutesa said, "How can I know what is better? I am like a man in darkness. All I ask is that I be taught to see." Very interesting. In 1880, Alexander was nearly devoid of supplies due to Mutesa's chiefs, and so he was waiting for an opportunity to share the gospel and to explain the gospel, but he was running out of food. He was running out of supplies. Would he be able to share the gospel in a way that Mutesa would believe when he has all these other voices speaking into his ears? Would MacKay get a chance to speak that gospel? I'll have to tune in tomorrow to see. Have a great day.